All right, welcome back to the Snod Pod with John Snodgrass, your mortgage resource, where we're talking real estate, mortgages, and beyond. Today, I've got Aletha Champine of Keller Williams, Wauwatosa, a real estate agent. Thanks for coming in today.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate
it.
Of course. So I usually like to just start off with guests, kind of get your, origin story or how you started. Did you get into real estate right out of college, or what happened first?
Yeah.
Before you got to real estate?
Gosh, I think it would have been nice if I had an actual direct path to real estate. I think it probably would have led to a lot less stress on my parents' end. But no, I undergrads in political science, communication, graduated, and I was like, shit, you know what? I want to do hard science. So I went back for a post-bac in chemistry, and I actually worked in medical research at the Milwaukee Medical College for a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Then the recession hit, and, grant funding is kind of being pulled back, and I saw, the forest between the trees a little bit, and I was like, all right, got to have another plan just in case. And it honestly was boring for me. It was really isolating. I was working by myself a lot. It was just me and my, my iPod back then. I think it may have been the Shuffle.
Sure.
And so I went back to business school. But then I was applying for actually medical sales jobs,
Okay.
but
This was the two degrees.
This is like 2007, and all of a sudden there were no jobs.
Yeah.
The market crashed. Everyone was pulling back on hiring. So I ended up being a nanny.
Okay.
And the plan was to finish the MBA, nanny for 2 years, and then hopefully the economy would recover, and it didn't. It took a little bit longer than I had planned, and I nannied a lot longer than I planned. So about 10 years later, I was like, what am I doing?
And are you in Milwaukee?
I'm still in Milwaukee.
Okay.
Yep. And I volunteered on some fundraising boards and stuff throughout. So I had a lot of connections, and honestly, it was one of those things where I was doing a lot of like personal growth and development, and I was talking to a therapist about that existential, like, what am I supposed to do with life?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, you start asking your friends. And so that night I was getting drinks with one of my best friends. I've known her almost my whole life, and her brother was a Keller Williams agent.
Oh, really?
Pretty fresh.
Okay.
And so I was like, I'm going to ask Alex about, what it's like, if her brother likes working in real estate. So we meet at a bar, and she's like, oh, before I forget, Griffin said, you should talk to him about getting into real estate.
Oh, wow.
And I had this moment of like, all right, well, there it is.
Talking.
Yeah. So I reached out to Keller Williams literally the next day, signed up for the classes, and, that was in 2017. So
Okay.
I've been a full-time agent it'll be 4 years officially in August. And then I was part-time for the first two.
Part-time for the first 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of a backwards, wayward path, but it turns out I've used kind of all of the education I've acquired over the years, in different ways, kind of throughout growing the business.
Got it. I'm thinking like, the medical background, some analytical, and then you're doing the sales too. So
yeah. So data,
well.
yeah, I definitely understand statistics and data, and I can kind of learn a new market or new niche pretty quickly. I always tell my buyers, I was like, looking at as many homes as we can is a lot like research. You're collecting data so you can confidently, pull the trigger on kind of that quote unquote the one of homes. And
what were the first couple years like, and then all of a sudden things change, COVID hits, and what was it like showing people homes at that time?
So I had, of course, the way that my life goes is I had just in August quit my full-time nanny position and said goodbye to that. I was salaried essentially.
Okay.
And went full-time all in on real estate, and then 6 months later COVID hits, right? And I'm like, now I've got the apartment, I'm like 100% on my own to make it. I had a business partner at the time, and I just kind of adopted the mindset of like, I can't control all the noise outside. Let's just, put my head down and do the work. And I ended up thriving. I think my business doubled the year of COVID. I started really building my team. I said goodbye to my business partner and kind of went literally all in on myself. And it was interesting. It was just like, a lot of times I'll say to clients that I miss COVID because we were able to just look at homes with no other showings happening at the same time. It was just a little bit more of an intimate experience.
Sure.
So I really took that time and I just kind of built my business during that kind of like heads down, locked in your home. I also met my husband during the time too. So, it was just, that was the good old days as far as my real estate career for sure.
So, I mean, during that time, was there a lot of, FaceTime or were you with clients showing houses? Them?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were.
So,
was there any of that FaceTime stuff?
I mean, we
I feel like
did.
That happens still today. But.
Yeah, we did I adopted a lot of Zoom. I implemented a lot of like my home buyers now have been on Zoom. That still I use today. Okay. It's just it more keeps efficient. Things. It's more efficient. I find especially first time buyers. Feel more comfortable in their own space when they're talking about home and building, a new space. So it kind of lets their guard down when they're at home and just, it's more of a conversation over Zoom as opposed to some formal business meeting.
Yeah.
And then showing still happened. They just, masked up one party in a house at a time, which I would give anything to go back to as opposed to, kind of the circus that is today's market.
Yeah. What about, so like, I'm just thinking about like, the buyers that I'm working with, you got your kind of first investment property, buyer. Are you talking to each of those three, a little bit differently? And if so, how are you talking to them?
Yes and no. I think there's kind of the what the heck happens next question in all of those demographics, right? Like whether you're the first time home buyer and you're taking the leap, there's anxiety and fear on that end. Investors, obviously, that's a second mortgage for most of them, almost all of them, especially first time investors. The what if how do I fill out a lease or what what utilities should I cover, things like that. And then I'm working with some they're not downsizers. They own a home that they're keeping, but they're buying a condo here in Milwaukee right now. And they're like, we haven't been through this process in 13 years.
Yeah.
What do we need to know? Like how should we be reading this contract? Things like that. So
are they like a first time home buyer almost again?
Yeah, essentially. So it doesn't really matter where you are and how many times you've been through the process. I always kind of just lead with information.
Yeah.
And the more I can offer up front, it kind of lets them feel comfortable to ask questions throughout.
Yeah.
'Cause even if, you've been through it 100 times, it's still every transaction, as is nuanced.
Yeah.
So there's always, those things that come up no matter what that we just haven't covered before. So
That's really good. Now, I remember we, got coffee a while ago and, talking some real estate, and you had mentioned you'd taken a course with Ryan Serhant, the famous,
my $1 million listing.
There we go. Yeah.
$1 million mentor. So when I met my husband, my husband Perry is very into personal development. He runs a business and has a corporate 9-to-5, somehow does both seamlessly. And he really attributes a lot of his like time management and growth that he's seen in both corporate and business ownership to coaches.
Okay.
So when I went all in on myself, I had hired essentially a life coach to kind of help me just hold me accountable and things like that. But I kind of outgrew her at one point. And I was still 2020, and I was scrolling Facebook, and I got an ad for Ryan's kind of new course and essentially like coaching program.
Sure.
It was really new at the time, and I looked at my husband, and he's like, "Well, I'm never going to say no to a coach."
Yeah.
So I interviewed for it. You kind of have to go through a little bit of a process, and at that time, it was so new for Ryan that he offered one-on-one meeting with him in New York.
Oh wow.
So I I made the investment, and then Perry and I flew out that spring out to April in April, and met Ryan, and he and I have been friends ever since. And I've rebranded my team recently, and he's helped me kind of make commitments with colors and branding and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he seems like a very genuine, honest guy,
Yeah.
and like I've seen that, his ads, through Instagram and stuff.
Yeah,
He just,
yeah.
Seems like he's there to help.
Yeah,
So I was just curious on him.
Yeah, and
watch
his
the
mom's
show.
from the Milwaukee area originally.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's
he
right.
definitely has that Midwest kind of, just
Yeah.
laid back personality, very Wisconsin nice, as one
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah.
And so he's just mentored me in a lot of ways to kind of help me grow my business, how I service, my clients, how I've grown our ops team, things like that.
Yeah, one thing on that, I remember on one of his shows, they came back here years ago to visit his grandma or something. And,
And stayed at the worst hotel.
Yeah. We got to get him back here to show, Milwaukee in
yeah.
a better light. I think he was,
He's talked about
having
it.
some
We've talked
fun
about filming some
with us.
content when he's back in town.
All right,
So
let's get him on the snot.
yeah,
years.
yeah.
So I guess you mind sticking around one more? We'll talk more like local market conditions and what's going on. And
Yeah,
how
a lot's going on.
crazy it
Yeah.
is right now. This is the Snod Pod with your mortgage resource, John Snodgrass, where we're talking real estate, mortgages, and beyond. We'll be right back.